Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving into an ancient text that tackles a feeling I know we've all felt, a profoundly modern feeling. We're looking at Psalm 73, and specifically we're unpacking that deep, kind of uncomfortable envy we get when terrible people just seem to succeed while good people are left struggling. It's really a text about hitting a complete spiritual and psychological wall, and more importantly, how you find your way back from that.
So let's just dive right into this deeply personal psychological journey of a guy named Asaph. He's the author of this text, and he grappled with the apparent injustice of the world in a way that feels, well, incredibly relatable right now. I mean, have you ever looked around at people who lie, cheat, or step all over others and notice they seem to be doing just fine? Actually, scratch that. They're not just fine, they're thriving. And that observation forces Asaph to ask a really terrifying question. Is playing by the rules, keeping your heart clean, just completely in vain?
Right in the opening verses of our source text, you get this raw, unfiltered honesty. Asaph starts out with a classic statement of faith in verse 1. Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But then, literally in the very next breath, in verse 2, there's this massive, jarring pivot. But as for me. He just lays it out there and confesses to a near-fatal crisis of the mind. He knows exactly what he's supposed to believe, but his lived reality, it's telling him a completely different story.
Section 1. A near-fatal slip. We begin our narrative arc right at the edge of disaster. Asaph admits his feet had almost stumbled and his steps had nearly slipped. This isn't just some minor doubt. We're talking about a total existential freefall.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the root of this near-fatal slip. It wasn't caused by his own moral failure. He didn't stumble because he suddenly decided to go out on a crime spree. No, he stumbled because he was watching. The text literally says, "For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." His entire crisis was born out of observation and comparison. Watching the unrighteous completely thrive while he's over there struggling to maintain his integrity, it almost destroyed him.
Section 2. Prospering of the wicked. Let's look at exactly what he was seeing that made him so unbelievably envious. It's actually fascinating how vividly he builds the case for why he's so frustrated with the world around him. In verses 4 through 12, he lists a mountain of evidence. He says these arrogant people have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek, meaning in that culture they are living in absolute luxury and comfort. They aren't in trouble like the rest of mankind. And he uses these incredible metaphors, saying pride is their necklace and violence covers them as a garment. They are literally wearing their corruption like high fashion. And the absolute worst part? They get away with it. They scoff, they speak with malice, and they even set their mouths against the heavens, basically mocking the idea of divine justice by asking, how can God know? Yet, despite all this arrogance, they're always at ease, just endlessly increasing in riches.
Section 3. The wearisome task. Watching the worst of humanity turn into the most successful of humanity, it pushes the authors into a state of absolute exhaustion.
This represents the ultimate breaking point of his faith. In verse 13, he just cries out, "All in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence." He feels stricken all day long, rebuked every single morning. He has effectively concluded that playing by the rules, having ethics, maintaining a pure heart, it's a complete and utter waste of time. I mean, why bother being good when the bad guys are the ones winning?
As we move into the second half of the text, verses 14 through 28, we start to see the immense internal toll this takes. He notes in verse 16 that trying to understand this injustice was a wearisome task. It was physically and mentally depleting. And interestingly, in verse 15, he mentions keeping all of this completely bottled up. He didn't want to speak these toxic thoughts out loud because he was terrified it would betray the generation of God's children. So he's completely isolated, totally exhausted, and right on the brink of giving up.
Section 4. The Sanctuary Pivot. Let's see how all this tension builds to the most dramatic paradigm shift in the entire poem.
The entire narrative of Psalm 73 hangs on this one single word in verse 17. He was completely lost, completely exhausted, until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. Stepping into the sanctuary provided this sudden, radical shift in perspective. He finally stopped looking at the immediate, earthly scoreboard and stepped into a space of eternal clarity.
Suddenly, the illusion is completely shattered. There's a really stark contrast here. While Asaph originally perceived the wicked as always at ease, always increasing in riches, and totally secure, the actual reality he discerns in the sanctuary is that God has set them in slippery places. They are falling to ruin, destroyed in a moment, swept away utterly by terrors. He says they're like a dream when one awakes, just phantoms. So,
The prosperity of the wicked, it isn't a solid foundation at all. It's a trap door. Sure, they might be highly successful right now, but they are standing on thin ice.
Section 5. My portion forever. Gaining this massive cosmic perspective forces Asaph to look inward. He doesn't just judge the wicked anymore, he actually turns the mirror on his own bitter, envious reaction.
He completely owns up to it in verses 21 and 22, admitting that when his soul was embittered, he was brutish and ignorant, acting like a beast. His envy had literally stripped him of his humanity and his reason. But then, the narrative beautifully resolves right here. Despite his near-fatal slip, despite all his intense bitterness, he says, "Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold my right hand." Even when he was totally losing his grip, he realizes he was still being held. He acknowledges that he's guided by counsel and will ultimately be received to glory.
This is the exact moment his earthly envy completely evaporates, replaced by a profound spiritual clarity. He pens one of the most famous verses of the entire text, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you." He no longer wants the fatness, the riches, or the ease of the arrogant. He recognizes that those who are unfaithful will ultimately perish, but he has finally found his ultimate lasting desire.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer depth of his final realization. Verse 26 reads, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." But if you look closely at the footnote in the source text for the word strength, the original Hebrew translation is actually rock. God is the rock of his heart. Just think about that contrast for a second. The wicked are set in slippery places, right? But Asaph is anchored to a rock. His own internal resources, his flesh and his heart, might completely fail him, just like they did at the beginning of the text. But his ultimate portion is permanent and unshakable.
As we wrap up this explainer, Asaph's journey leaves us with an incredibly powerful reflection. We all face that same wearisome task of living in a deeply unfair world. We all experience that near-fatal slip of envy at some point. So the question you have to ask yourself is this: when envy clouds your vision, and the success of the arrogant makes you just want to give up entirely, where is your sanctuary? How do you step back from all the noise to find the eternal clarity you need to keep your heart clean? Thanks for exploring this fascinating text with me today. Keep seeking that clarity, and we'll see you next time.